From the William B. Travis Building in Austin, Texas, we're keeping Texas energy on track. Here's your host, Bryce Dubee.
Hey everyone, welcome to Texas Energy on Track. I am your host, Bryce Dubee, and I am joined today, and I think going forward in the future, by our producer, Nick Kraynok. Hey, Nick.
Hey, how's it going? This is fun. We're here. We got it. This is the first episode.
Yeah, I know. I feel like this has been several months in the work. I mean, probably even longer than that at this point. I know the ideas have been floating around. But yes, this is the very first episode of the official podcast for the Railroad Commission of Texas, Texas Energy on Track. A little bit of a pun there. We got an audio track, our history with railroads, and then sort of what we do as a regulatory body. So I think we have a lot of things to talk about. I think first and foremost, the biggest thing for anyone who's listening out there, why does the Railroad Commission need a podcast?
Good question. I think there's a lot. I don't know if you're going to answer that, but I can generalize it. I think there's a lot. People think that we're a regulatory agency, but there's a lot that goes on within the Railroad Commission and what we do, not only in Austin, but also all across the state at district offices, and then as well as with other, things that we have going on, from site cleanup, remediation, well plugging. There's a lot, and it has nothing to do with railroads. Yeah,
I think, and just a little, sort of backstory for me. With myself, I'm fairly new to the agency. I just started here in February of this year, and when there was discussions about coming in to do a host of the podcast. And one of the things my boss said when I first came on board was, you need to be the host for this podcast, because when we bring guests in for every episode, it's going to be a learning experience for you, talking to all those folks throughout the agency and be able to explain that to listeners just through your very nature of your job. And I think it's going to be a very fascinating and learning experience for me. How long have you been here, Nick?
I've been here 4 years as of May of this year, 4 years. So I have a little bit of experience, but I still learn a lot all the time. There's so much. I think we keep learning in this as the agency as well as with the industry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the one thing, when people think Texas, they think big and they think energy. And if there's one thing that we play a part in, is really making sure that all remains on track, for lack of a better term.
I like that. There you go. I like that.
This is going to be sort of our introductory episode. It'll be a little bit shorter than some of our other ones in the future. We'll talk a little bit at the end about what we have kind of lined up down the road as far as some of the guests and topics we'd like to talk about. But I think for today, let's just kind of get into the Railroad Commission itself, a little bit about ourselves, just the host, producer, and who we are. We mentioned it briefly, but we can go a little bit further into that. And then just talk about the history of the agency, I think would be really kind of a great way to kind of work all that out. And then what's on the road ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you laid it out perfectly. And I can say from what I know about you in the short time that we've worked together, you've done this before. I haven't.
Yes, this is my second podcast. For folks, at least in the Austin area, I did host the podcast for Austin Bergstrom International Airport several years ago. So if anyone has transitioned from the aviation podcast world to the oil and gas regulatory podcast world, you have a familiar voice. I'm the agency spokesperson here for the Railroad Commission, and I'm coming over from the Department of Defense, specifically the Department of the Army. I've spent the past few years in D.C., working at the Pentagon, doing media relations there. Thrilled to be coming back to Texas. The Army brought me here years ago when I was in uniform, ended up falling in love with the state and staying here. I've been in Texas for about 10 years. Took, again, a brief hiatus to D.C. and then came back. Came on board in February of this year as agency spokesperson. I've been doing some really fun things so far. Actually, I've already had our first sort of venture out working with media out in the oil fields down in Luling. I know you were out with us. That was a rainy day. That's a story for another day. But getting my feet wet already and learning about everything that RRC does, and excited to really dive into more of that with this podcast. And again, you said you've been here 4 years. What's your role?
Previously, before, I spent 13 years working in TV, actually. So I did a little bit of radio, very, very little, guest things at a local radio station when I worked up in Lubbock. But yeah, I was in San Angelo for 6 years, doing the weather, and then also filming high school football, sometimes doing sports, small market TV. You do pretty much everything. So it gave me a good experience. And then I moved up to Lubbock. I was there for 7 years. And then when the opportunity came, my wife is from Round Rock. So a chance to get back to Central Texas or get to Central Texas for me. We couldn't pass it up. So I was very lucky and fortunate to land a job here at the Railroad Commission, working with the communications division, doing a little bit of everything. Film and video and now a podcast and taking pictures, taking video, doing training videos. So there's a lot that we do in the communications side. I guess I should mention I'm originally from West Virginia, actually. So up from Northeast, went to college at Penn State. And then when I got that first job in TV in San Angelo, it's the first time I'd ever been to Texas. Never heard of San Angelo, but I lived there and met my wife there, and we love that area. A bit of a 180 from my previous career, but I think I hit the ground running. And like I said earlier, I mean, learning all the time, which I think is a good thing.
That's always, I think, the coolest thing. Again, I've been doing like public affairs, media relations and things for about 20 years now. And I think that's probably my favorite part of the job, whether it was when I was in the Army, when I was working for Austin Bergstrom, working with I was previously a PAO for the State Veterans Commission here in Texas. You get to see so many different things, and you can really kind of be a Swiss Army knife and all that. But anyways, that's what I'm kind of looking forward to most as we get into the future of this podcast.
Well, like how you mentioned, you already got your feet wet when we were out in the field. That's another thing with the job too, is especially in communications, we can get out of the office. I don't think like it's a normal 8 to 5 job. We get out and we're able to do things like the witness while plugging on the site, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking forward to getting out to West Texas. I know that's something we've been talking about. Maybe we can record an episode out there.
Never know.
We'll see.
I know we'll touch on West Texas for sure. There's a lot going on out there.
Absolutely. I guess just kind of moving forward, though, let's talk a little bit. What is the Railroad Commission of Texas? I mean, we've got a long history. It goes back 130 years. And the name, I guess, was more accurate in the past as far as what we regulated and things. And that's where we got our start, from what I understand. 1891, I think, is where when we were created in the legislature.
Yeah, April of 1891 via legislative mandate. So, and at that point, it was originally formed to regulate the rail industry, the 1800s, early 1900s. So we did actually have jurisdiction over the railroads, but I think that's something that a lot of people, and I formerly ran our social media accounts of the Railroad Commission, so I see the comments. I know there's a lot of people that don't actually know the Railroad Commission doesn't have regulation over railroads anymore, and also they may not know why, which I think we're going to touch on. We're the oldest regulatory agency in the state of Texas.
That's really cool. And again, 130 years, but fairly early on, in the agency history, with kind of the rise of railroad, there was another big boom in Texas, which we all know from our Texas history. I mean, the oil boom. In 1917, the legislature added some additional responsibilities to the RRC through the passage of the Pipeline and Petroleum Law, and that made us the chief energy regulator. And then by 1919, we added in oil and gas production. And then in 1920, the Gas Utilities Act, which gave the commission the regulatory authority over individuals and businesses who produce, transport, and distribute natural gas throughout Texas. So oil and gas. We've added other things along the way, too, which I know we'll get into more with surface mining and things like that. In 1937, there was a natural gas explosion in New London, Texas, which I found out it was the third deadliest disaster in Texas history.
Yeah.
Like just an awful, it sounded like there was like a gas leak in a school or something, and there was a massive explosion.
Yeah, and that was unfortunate because up until then, you couldn't smell natural gas. I mean, it has no natural smell. So because of that tragic event actually led to the odorization of natural gas, which they have that chemical called mercaptan, which smells like rotten eggs. So, which makes it a lot easier to smell.
Yeah, and it was interesting seeing like that stage in our history and seeing what happened with that tragedy and sort of the regulations that came out of it. It was when like a couple weeks or months, like this happened, they took action, RRC stepped in, and now when you have gas and you know when the gas is on.
I know I've had, unfortunately, to deal with a couple of gas leaks. You can't miss it, and there's no second guessing. You're like, yeah, that's natural gas. We got to take action.
And then that's just really kind of reinforces where the agency exists. Part of our piece is working with the safety of all Texans, all the way to the house with natural gas flowing to your homes and all of those types of things. I know that's something we're going to talk about in the future on some of these episodes. I think another thing that's interesting with the history of the commission, so we have 3 commissioners. And initially, back in the 1800s, they were appointed by the governor. But even fairly early on, the legislature made that decision to really sort of empower the people of Texas. There's now 3 commissioners. It's been since 1894. 3 commissioners. They each serve 6-year terms, and they're overlapping terms, sort of like what you see like in the U.S. Senate. So they don't all get elected in the same year, and there's that kind of overlap, which I think is interesting. So we have 3 commissioners right now serving their terms just like we did in 1894. And I think another thing, just when we're talking about power, there's a lot more things that have kind of been added to the portfolio over the years. By the 1970s, I mean, we were the powerhouse for oil and gas in the state. No pun intended, but maybe a little.
You're dropping all the puns today.
I can't help. I mean, from the name of our show on down, I'm sorry. But there's so many different things related to the RC that I think are just really, really interesting that we could have some really good conversations with some of our subject matter experts here.
And another thing you may not think with Texas is coal mines. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I believe there's 27 still active coal permits. I'm, like I said, from West Virginia, but that's a coal state. I'm like, oh yeah, I know coal mines everywhere. The Texas, really? But yeah, it's mainly the lignite coal, which is used for electricity use mostly and heat. I was out at a mine in Rockdale not too long ago, back in the 1930s, I believe, the early 1900s at least. There was some of that coal from Rockdale was going both to UT and Texas A&M. So I guess a more friendly side of that rivalry was using the coal to heat their universities. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, mostly that lignite coal that in uranium, as you said, you really don't think of that, but it's here.
Yeah, and we're seeing sort of those discussions like in the energy space in Texas now. When you're seeing sort of lots of conversations going on with nuclear power and things for powering some of these new AI centers and data centers and things like that. There's a lot of it. We're really on the cusp of a really dynamic industry and space and a lot of different things that are going on. We just earlier this year approved our first geothermal permit, which is super cool. There's some things going on with carbon capture. There's a lot of really interesting things that are happening throughout the energy sector in Texas. And I think this is going to be an exciting series for listeners if they want to see kind of sort of the inside of how some of that stuff works, and we can be able to talk about a bunch of different topics on all those things. The one thing, though, we will not be talking about, I think, moving forward from this episode is trains.
That's right.
So just for the folks out there, our remaining, as far as regulatory functions for railroads, were transferred to TxDOT back in 2005. So since then, we have had no railroad regulated functions. So if you are a fan of trains and railroads, this is unfortunately not the podcast for you, but we're going to bring a lot of energy. That was an intentional pun.
I like that.
I know there's some other topics that we've kind of got lined up for the future we want to talk about. I don't know if you want to get into any of these as far as we've got our brownfields and some of these other types of things, or if that's something just maybe we want to tease for future episodes. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much we do and that we have jurisdiction over, and that there's a lot of, and maybe it's another thing people don't know, is a lot of the environmental things that we do. So the Brownfields Response Program, that was actually created to incentivize the remediation of properties in Texas contaminated by oil and gas related activities. So if the activities contaminated the area, we can go in and with grant money, clean it up. It's not taxpayer money, but with grant money, the Brownfields Response Program cleans it up. And just off the top of my head, because I've been there and filmed the video down in Galveston, Artist Boat Preserve, that is a brownfield site that is used, I know, for a lot of summer camps. There's hiking trails, there's wildlife, so things like that. There's a voluntary cleanup program where we clean up. It's just an additional incentive for landowners to remediate properties contaminated by oil and gas. And then there's alternative fuels we'll get into. There's just so much under one regulatory agency that we have over 1,000 employees statewide that really keep us going down the track, if I want to throw in a pun of my own.
Perfect. Yeah, I know. I think those are just kind of just touching even the basis of some of the topics that we're going to talk about this season. I know some of the other things that we've got lined up. I think our next episode, we're going to get into talking about orphan wells and well plugging, which is a huge program for anyone out there who listens to the news, follows the legislature, and some of those other topics. You probably have seen that mentioned a lot with our name. So we're going to talk to one of our experts on what that all means. What is an orphan well? Why do they become orphaned? How do all of those sort of things work? And how do we plug a well and what that means for protecting groundwater and resources? I know that's next on the list. We've got a couple other ones. Seismicity is something that pops up on the news all the time when you hear about sometimes quakes out in West Texas. It should be a really good season. There's some really interesting things as far as topic-wise we want to kind of dive into, but also really kind of behind the curtain as far as who some of the people are who make things happen here at RC, really spotlighting some of the amazing, like you said, 1,000+ employees who work here. We've got other folks out there. I know our Office of Public Engagement is on the road. They put in unbelievable hours out there meeting with local community. I mean, and I think no stop is too small for them to visit and talk just to help educate and share information about RC with the community. Just lots of really cool, compelling topics that I'm really excited to get to share with you and with all of our listeners out there this year.
Yeah, and what we're going to do is we're going to be releasing each episode on the first Wednesday. So we're going to do the podcast once a month. We're talking with our RC employees, the experts in the field. We have a lot of great topics that we're going to keep going once a month, and then we'll see, how it goes from there. Maybe in season 2 we do twice a month. It's up to you, the listeners. Let's make sure to download and subscribe, and we're going to make sure that we help to promote the agency, the employees, and just give some transparency to maybe just people out there that don't really know what we do or the different divisions we have, or just, the different things within the divisions that we even can touch on. So there's a lot of info, and I think that this podcast is going to be a great thing to get out and really give some information to people of the state of Texas.
And you mentioned social media. I know this podcast is going to be distributed basically on all the channels where folks can find podcasts on just their regular platforms. But if I want to learn a little bit more, you said, I know you've managed our social media programs before. Where can you find their RC online?
Everywhere, not TikTok, but everywhere else. We're on X, which is @TXRRC. And then to make it easier for you, on LinkedIn and Facebook, just search Railroad Commission of Texas. On Instagram, Railroad Commission of Texas. And all of our accounts have the blue check mark, and we have the check mark on LinkedIn as well. So any of the accounts with the check marks, be sure to follow along. We're going to be putting clips out there, and we're going to make sure that when the podcast is going to air, give you a little preview, and make sure hey, we've uploaded an episode. Make sure you subscribe too, because I think you get notifications on some of the podcast apps as well.
Yeah, we'll make sure. If we'd love to see how many subscribers we can get out there, because this, again, like I said, we've got an exciting future for this whole thing. We're really looking forward to it, and we hope get as many folks as we can to join in and listen in the future. And also, as always, if you need to find more information about the agency, all of our permitting applications, paperwork, everything else on the detail side, www.rrc.texas.gov is our official website. I think that about wraps it up for this inaugural episode. Just kind of a quick dive into everything that maybe ran a little longer than we planned. Thinking about quick, but
and that's okay. I mean, there's a lot of information to share. Like you touched on, coming up in July is going to be our episode with the orphan wells and well plugging, which is I think a hot button topic.
So yeah, really looking forward to that episode, as well as everything else we've got lined up in the future. But once again, thank you so much for joining all of us for our very first episode of Texas Energy on Track here with the Railroad Commission. I'm your host, Bryce Dubee. I'm again joined by our producer, Nick Kraynok, who is really kind of running the show behind the scenes. I'm just kind of here to talk, I think, some. So thanks, Nick, for everything that you do and getting this whole thing set up. I know this has been kind of a labor of love and a big lift for you, and I hope that the listeners out there really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been fun and exciting, and then we're ready to keep rolling, putting out an episode a month. So be sure to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app, and we'll send notifications with that, and then check our social media as well.
Awesome. Hey, well, until next time, we'll talk to y'all soon.